Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 3, Episode 10, The Stars at Night. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Lower Decks. So I have to start with the spoiler warning for Lower Decks up to the Season 3 finale. If you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, this was a really good finale. I really liked it. Now, Lower Decks has different kinds of episodes. Episodes that lean more into the comedy, into the silliness, into the just ridiculous shit happening that you just take with a grain of salt. And it has its more sort of serious episodes that are more sort of plot-based and action-based and character-based, and maybe meant to be taken a tad bit more seriously. Now, I find that the season finales tend to be more of that in that second group, leaning more towards that, where it's more, there's always comedy in every episode, but the finales tend to lean more of that sort of action, suspense, character story aspect of it, more than, say, some episodes like Crisis Point and Excretus, which is like flat out just silly. And I think that's true of this episode. I think it definitely, for the most part, was more of a serious plot of suspense, and it really was engaging in that regard. However, there was definitely a lot of silliness to the premise. It wasn't silliness in like the characters themselves or the situations. I don't know, the specific situations weren't ridiculous, like saying in Excretus where they were doing the naked time. Like, the whole premise is just ridiculous. So the specific tension was real and serious. The whole California class could have been stricken from Starfleet, and then they find out the Admiral had been plotting against them this whole time, and then the whole ship was in danger. And then when the project went awry, the starbase was in danger, people were dying, and the ships had to use their wits to outwit them. So all of that it was like really straightforward, like serious, really good, like suspense plot stuff. However, the overall base premise of a lot of, especially the entire episode and a lot of what happens, was really silly. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. In fact, Lower Decks can get away with it because it's a comedy show. If this happened in more of a more serious show, like, Strange New Worlds or Discovery, it would be harder for me to overlook it and be like, well, that's just dumb. But Lower Decks, I do give a lot more leeway because it is, in fact, a comedy show. In fact, I think it really works for the episode. So, what's silly about it is the whole, let's do a second contact race to see who gets. That's really silly. That's not a thing, and that's not really something that actually makes sense. That I could see Starfleet doing it. And plus, the whole concept of having an automated ship do second contacts, like, part of the main thing of second contacts is diplomacy, and so it doesn't really make sense to have automated ships do it. But whatever, they need to create stakes for the episode. And as I said, if this was a serious drama, I would call these fake stakes, but it's a silly comedy, and so I can allow them to be silly with their premise, especially when it leads to more interesting character stories. And plus, there's a lot of, jokes throughout, which I feel like, it's hard for me to describe, but they just say, but the characters themselves are, acting serious. It's not like, say the episode where Boimler is getting hunted by that creature, and the creature runs past the captain while hunting Boiler is like, thanks for some mimosas or whatever. That's just ridiculous. But here it's like they say things that are meant to sound serious, but are actually quite silly and funny in that regard. It works for the comedy. For example, when Rutherford reveals that they're using his code for the Texas class ships, and it's flawed because it's the same code he used to create Badgie. Tendi was like, "Oh no, we can't have a ship with daddy issues," and that's actually what happens. The ship does have daddy issues and ends up like attacking Starfleet and kills the admiral and tries to kill Rutherford. But that's just a funny line. That's just such a silly line. We can't have a starship with daddy issues, and the way she delivered it, like, it's hilarious. I think, it's hard for me to describe. Maybe there's scholars of comedy that know the exact terminology, but this was a slightly different style of comedy where there was, the characters were really believed everything was serious, and the plot was serious and the suspense, but just the circumstances around it were really silly and ridiculous. that actually worked for the humor. It worked as a style of comedy. So I really appreciated it. To be clear, I thought this all really worked. I was trying to think of all, like, one of my favorite moments of the episode that I absolutely loved was when they were being hunted down by the automated ship, and they were trying to figure out how to outwit it, and the captain calls for ideas, and everyone starts throwing out ideas, or Shaq's like, we should eject the warp core, and everyone's like, oh, maybe we use the deflector disc. And I think it was Ransom. I didn't catch this until the second time I was watching this, is that Ransom threw out, maybe we could logic fallacy it to death, which is a nice reference because it's something that Kirk did in multiple episodes of the original series, and Rutherford's just like, no, I wrote a logic fallacy protection program in, which in itself is a ridiculous statement and funny. I can't believe I missed this the first time around, but of course the whole time Boimler was like, I think we should listen to Shax, but no one's listening to him. Finally, it's like, shut up! Listen to Shax! And Shax is like, what? I just said eject the warp core. and the Freeman's like, he's always saying that. And then she's like, wait! That actually would work here. And Shaq, I love Shaq's response. Like, it would, and this was kind of over the top comedy moment within this episode, where, because of course serious show would never do this, and I would never buy. I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. But again, comedy show completely works when Shax is going to eject the warp core, and there's like people lined up and cheering him on. It's like, yeah, you got to do it. He's like, he's so happy and so thrilled because he constantly says we should eject the warp core, and they give him the honors. He's like, ooh, my honors, I finally get to do it. Like, not only was that moment hilarious, but honestly, I got into it. It made me want to like cheer and be happy for Shax that he finally gets to eject the warp core. And in fact, I would say a lot of this episode has a whole get up and cheer aspect to it, and that's why I think, even though the premise of the whole AI turning evil and the whole race thing is all silly. You can't have a starship with daddy issues, but it's still like the plot still works in getting me invested and making me like get up and cheer when they actually overcome these issues. Now, speaking of Shax, it starts with we had that scene at the start of the episode where Boimler was doing his impersonations of the senior officers, which I like. It's funny, but of course, as a sitcom trope, Shax walks in right when he's impersonating him, and he gets her all upset. Now, usually I don't really like sitcom tropes like that, but I think what they did with this in this episode worked, because it created this tension between Boimler and Shax, where Boimler was like, and I think that's what helped sell that moment with the warp core, because Boimler kept trying to apologize to Shax, but he wouldn't take it, and we saw him crying. So it shows that he was really upset over the fact that Boimler was mocking him. But then Boimler redeems himself and actually sticks up for Shax. And at the end of the episode, when Shax goes up to Boimler, it's like, you! Like, all angry. I knew that was a fake out. But he was like, and he hugs him. It's like, oh, thanks so much, baby bear. You're one of the bears now. He's like, are you my bridge buddy? He's like, yeah. I'm like, again, I like that. Like, made me like, oh, isn't that so great for Boimler? It made me want to cheer for Boimler. It's funny that a ridiculous comedy episode can get me like so invested, and really, wanting to cheer when characters get their way. Now, so I think that each of the four main characters had their moment in this episode. I already talked about Boimler, and this is another great thing about the finale, that they did service each of the four main characters, even though it was, like the previous episode, it was a bit more focused on the senior officers than a lot of episodes are, because it had to do with the bigger stakes, which is a necessity that they need to do. But they still went out of their way to make sure each of the four lower deckers got their play. As I said, with Boimler had this thing with Shax. Tendi had a nice moment on that planet during the race where she pointed out that there was a microscopic life form that could be sentient, and they need to test for sentience before they start terraforming. I feel like this was a direct reference to the Next Generation first season episode Home Soil, where there was like this microscopic life form. They didn't think it was an actual life form. They started terraforming or wiping out the sentient life form that started fighting back. Kind of rip off of Devil in the Dark, but this episode more referenced that. And it shows actually that Starfleet has learned from that experience and had created policy that they have to investigate every tiny microscopic life form to ensure it's not sentient, and something like that wouldn't happen again. In fact, the planet itself kind of reminded me, it looked like the planet from Home Soil. So I think it was a direct reference from that. And I like it, and it actually shows that Starfleet is learning from their mistakes and for doing these policies, and Tendi brought it up, but it ended up not being a sentient life form, and they ended up losing time. But as she points out later in the episode, the crew was very supportive of her, and like didn't make her feel like shit for slowing them down. They ultimately lost the race because of it. But later we find out, and I like how they're doing this when they're sitting in the bar or whatever, and Captain Freeman overhears Tendi, and was like, wait a second, you're right, that the freaking automated ship didn't check for this, and then goes to Admiral, and that's her sort of trump card to be like, I'm going to go to the Admiralty about this. We actually won because your automated machine flaunted the Prime Directive and skipped over these protocols, which I said which are probably in place because of the events in Home Soil, and therefore it's defective, and they actually lost, which is true. And I actually thought that was clever, so they gave Tendi her moment there. Rutherford, of course, got his moment at the end of the episode, where we get the conclusion of this storyline that's been going on since the end of last season, where there was hinted at a darker purpose to his implant, and something they touched on earlier this season, and they hinted at some mysterious figure who was on some mysterious project who erased his memory. We find out it was in fact this Admiral, and that he was using Rutherford's technology to build these automated ships, and Rutherford discovers that it's flawed technology and that it should not be being used. And again, another hilarious, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but another really hilarious moment of the episode that I loved was at the end, where Rutherford talked about, yes, my implants was dark and led to me losing my memories, but it's cool! like that's totally in character for Rutherford too. Like, I laughed out loud at that moment, and really it's like a plot device so you can keep that implant going forward in the show, but it works. It works for the tone of the show. It works for the character. It makes total sense. I love that moment as well. And then, of course, Mariner gets her whole storyline of being off in the archaeology thing. I love it. They make it a full-on Indiana Jones adventure type thing, which is not really what archaeology is actually about. And how she's off doing her own thing and loving it, but and I really like that how she gets suspicious and they're like, how's this getting funded? And her partner is like, yeah, don't worry about it, doesn't matter. And she investigates it and finds that that is actually legit. It's coming from Admiral Picard. And I actually like that because it would have been such a cliche for it to be like some really shady thing or whatever, and it turns out that no, it's not shady, it's all legit. Well, it does beg the question why her partner didn't just say so in the first place, why is she being coy about it, but whatever. I did like that, and it also led to the character development in Mariner, her realization that she was looking for something to be wrong, because deep down she wants to go back to Starfleet, which I think was a really, really nice touch. And of course she had her moment when she showed up and saved the day by bringing all the California class ships. Now, how practical is it that she'd be able to gather every single California class ship in that short amount of time and have enough time to save the Cerritos? To say it was extremely unlikely, I think, is an understatement. But again, comedy shows, so I'm like, yeah, okay. We'll roll with it. And we got all these cameos from previous California class ships that we've seen previous in the show. And I do like that. So several other things I wanted to talk about. First, the automated ships, the Texas class ships, how whenever the admiral in charge, I don't want to try to butcher his name, but whenever the admiral in charge, we've seen him operating this system looked exactly like the M5 computer from the original series episode, The Ultimate Computer, which was a similar premise about an automated ship. And then trying to take over and knock that main character, in that case Kirk rather than Freeman, out of a job. But it turned evil and started destroying ships and killing people, which is pretty much exactly what happened here. But I feel like this story is like different. I don't really see the storyline as a direct parody to the Ultimate Computer. There are definitely similarities, but I think it's original and unique enough to not be a direct parody and kind of just be similar, but mostly its own thing. So I see that visual cue of the computer looking exactly like the M5 computer to be more of like an Easter egg, like a visual callback. I don't think it's meant to be like the next M5 or have anything to do with M5. It was just like a visual callback. Which, again, I appreciate it. I did like that. And speaking of callbacks, we had that planet that phased out of existence, and I think every couple of years it phased back in for like 2 days or something, or 2 hours or something like that, which is definitely a reference to the episode Meridian of Deep Space Nine, which was a terrible episode, but it was clearly a different planet because that planet was in the Delta Quadrant and it went out of phase for like 60 years and like came into phase for like 2 weeks or something at a time. So the time frame for this is completely different, but it was definitely referencing, it's similar to that, so I feel like it was definitely referencing that. And that scene was kind of a straight out comedy scene, silly scene, where they saw the mother and the son on the, and he kept like didn't understand how Starship works, and she kept trying to yell to it, and she's like, "I can't hear it," and she was like just saying, "Oh, I want to thank Starfleet Federation for all these supplies," and he's like, "Bring replicators next time." Like, that was kind of funny. It was kind of just random too. I did like that. And what else was there? I know there was definitely something else referenced that I wanted to. Oh, of course, we saw the Vulcan character, I can't remember her name, but the same one who appeared in episode 9 of last season, was Douche, which I have noted and will continue to stand by this opinion, even though everyone and their mother disagrees with this opinion. I think that episode was just okay and overrated, but I even said when I did my review of that episode that I wanted to see this character again, and I was kind of disappointed, and a lot of people have been bringing up throughout the season, what about that Vulcan character? How come I thought they were implying she was going to come to the show. How come she never came to the show? Finally get to see her at the very end of the finale, and I do kind of like it. Does make me really excited to see what they're going to do with her next season, and I am a bit disappointed they waited this long to get to her, but I did like how they introduced her with Tendi going, oh my god, it's you, and she's like, can we talk somewhere quieter and get my duty assignment? She's like, no, well, let me introduce you to my friends, and pulls her along. And we can see her reactions to when all the silliness is going around, where she's kind of like, yeah, whatever. So I can't wait to see more of this character in the show. It's about time they brought her in, really. And one other thing I want to note is that when Mariner returns, which was a really nice return where everyone instantly forgave her and apologized for fucking up, and she, I think, is a really great character growth for her, because especially when she goes to her mother and her mother's like, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I didn't trust you, and she's like, well, you didn't trust me because I've been working very hard to make sure that you don't. That was like a really great character realization for her, that she didn't completely, and I love the fact that she didn't completely blame them all and be like, well, fuck you for abandoning me like this. Instead, she understood why that was their reaction, because she had kind of not earned their respect, and how she wanted to realize that what she really wants is to be in Starfleet. I think this was really well earned. It was a really great character moment. I also like how they flipped the script, where Freeman, where she's like, oh, can Ransom be my mentor? And Freeman's like, yeah, sure. And and they're like, oh, we got great news, Ransom Mariner's back and she's gonna be your shadow. He's like, no, why is this happening? Which is a nice little reversal, because at first, like, Ransom was like overseeing Mariner, and she was like, no, and he was all happy about it. It's like, I'm gonna make your life a living hell. But now is reversed in that manner, which I loved, which I did really appreciate that. Plus, I gotta point out that when Mariner first walked in, Jennifer kind of looked up and like, oh, Mariner's back. So I do wonder, I hope, and I kind of wish they touched on that more in this episode, but I hope we get more of the Mariner and Jennifer relationship, and see if that's can be mended or if that's completely destroyed after what happened. So that would be an interesting thing to explore going forward as well. I'm trying to rack my brain to see if there's anything else in this episode I really want to talk about, but I think that about covers it. I really liked this episode. As I said, not necessarily a laugh out loud episode, but there were moments where I was laughing out loud. There was moments where I wanted to get up and cheer. I thought it was probably one of the best combinations of serious suspense character story and comedy. Just the silly way they played it. I still think of that. Oh no, we can't have a starship with the daddy issue. Anyway, my rating for The Last Star out of 10. The Stars at Night. Sorry, not The Last Star. The Stars at Night. My rating for The Stars at Night out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. I thought this was a really good episode, a really powerful episode, maybe one of my favorite Lower Decks episodes, and I thought it was a great way to end the season. So that's it for my review of Star Trek Lower Decks. I will be doing a live discussion this Saturday, and I believe this will be over on my sister's channel, Alyssa Jean Reviews. I'll be doing a live discussion with her, this coming Saturday at 9 p.m. East Coast time, 6 p.m. West Coast time. I'll put the link to that in the description below once I receive that link. And next week I will be recording my own Star Trek Lower Decks Season 3 review, where I look back at Season 3 of Lower Decks as a whole. So you have those Lower Decks things come out. Also, in just a couple days, also Saturday actually, I'll be releasing my review for the mid-season premiere Star Trek Prodigy, returning for the second half of Season 1. And every week thereafter shall be reviewing Prodigy Thursday nights. And I believe next week, or is it, no, it's the week after, 2 weeks from now, I will be starting my Star Trek The Original Series episode review, where I go to every episode of the original series, one episode at a time. Except for the episodes I've already reviewed, in which case I will do Patreon-only videos for them to be released for my Patreon supporters. But all the original series episodes I haven't reviewed yet will all go in order. And that's starting in 2 weeks. So a lot going on with Enchantment of Eternity. So be sure to check out my channel for all the Star Trek material, as well as many other videos and other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.